So this actually is our last class for the semester. So part of what we'll do today at the end is kind of talk about what's next. A test, yes. The final exam will be in 2 weeks. Oh, one more here. Did I discount there? Oh, you can't. Hey, is this your twin? Oh my goodness. Well, welcome here. And listen, we're short. You guys outnumbered me. Give me just a couple. Oh, there's some more here. Just one? Okay, now that should cover. Hi, did everyone have one that needs one? Okay, cool. All right. So just a continued reminder, thinking about what we're trying to do in this class, where we're trying to go. And hopefully at the end of every class, we can think something about how we're increasing our knowledge and love of God, even if we're talking about aliens or something like that. How do we promote unity and fellowship of believers? Sometimes the issues when we're dealing with science and faith, there are issues that are probably more opinion than they are fact, and some are more essential than others. And so need to be willing to identify those and stick to what is essential and kind of be able to differentiate that. And then we also want to think about, how does what we're talking about in here help us talk with unbelievers and help increase plausibility structures or whatever God needs us to do to draw people in faith. We understand that we're not in charge of that, but we're God's conduits. And so how can we prepare ourselves to speak intelligently with people in the outside the church? So last week we kind of delved into this idea of aliens. It really has blossomed in our culture, and especially in the entertainment field. Every time you turn around, there's something that has to do with aliens in our media. And so think about like the new movie that just came out, which I'm really interested to go see, but that's Dune. What's that all about? It's all about life on other planets. Star Wars, Star Trek, all these things are very present in our mind. And the effect that has is that it really increases what I call a plausibility structure for the idea that there really are aliens out there. Now, do we have any evidence that there are aliens out there? Zero. We have no evidence of that. And yet if you were to talk to the average person on the street, they'd probably tell you there are aliens. But we have no evidence for it whatsoever. And so not only does this increase plausibility, there's also this kind of like expectation that not only are there aliens out there, but they're visiting us, and we expect them to come visit us. And I think when we look at media, when we look at culture, we have to remember that culture is a reflection of the human condition. We want to think about, what does that tell us about ourselves when we're so fascinated with this idea of extraterrestrials? What does that say about us? So we'll think about that a little bit more today. But and one of the things we talked about is that this whole idea of life on other planets, it actually was a Christian idea. It came out of Christian thinking. Because we talked a little bit about how prior to Christianity being involved in the explosive movement of science, that the worldview that people had didn't even support the idea of life on other planets, because they didn't even think there were planets. But Christian thinking kind of opened the door to that, and we even talked about how some good Christian thinkers entertained that, like Kepler. And we realized that really, truly, the idea of life on other planets is not inconsistent with Christian theology. Now, I wrote this very carefully when I said not inconsistent. Because if I say consistent, then it makes it sound like somewhere in the Bible there's some teaching in there that tells us that there's aliens on other planets. Folks, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. So that's why I kind of framed it that way. That's not inconsistent. There's nothing there that stands against what we know from Scripture. It doesn't violate that. So there could be, there might not be. And then we recognize, though, that when it comes to searching for ET, are there extraterrestrials out there? We recognize that it's a difficult problem for us. It's interesting. I think it's interesting either way. Whether we somehow discover that there's life on other planets or not. Either way, it's interesting, right? I think. But we recognize that it's difficult because when we're starting to look for planets out there that could support life, you've got a lot of requirements. And the requirements that they're using right now to help us pick out planets out in the universe is very limited. And even though we've identified some planets as possibly habitable, the constraints, the characteristics that we're looking at aren't enough to clearly delineate whether there would be life on that planet, especially intelligent life. So the search is really hard, and our ability to detect life-giving qualities of planets is really low, what we can detect. And remember, we talked about, the nearest habitable planet is as our filter is finding for us, is 1,400 light years away. Well, how much information can you get about a planet that's 1,400 light years away? Not much. Can you tell what the core of that planet is like? Nope. Can you tell what kind of atmosphere it has? Nope. Can you tell how much water's on that planet? Nope. So our ability to find ET is really difficult. And then, of course, what everyone anticipates is that ET is going to come visit us. And we talked about the idea that that's probably not a good expectation. We shouldn't be putting our energies and efforts that way, like forming commissions to create welcome centers for alien. Hey, that's a thing. That's a thing. Remember, on our last ballot, there was a voter initiative to form a commission to welcome aliens to Colorado. Now, it was defeated, thankfully, but that was a voter initiative, which meant what? You had to get 100,000 people in the state to sign a petition to put it on the ballot. That means there's 100,000 people out there in our community who think this might be a good idea. And so, yeah, right. But we recognize that we really should not be expecting ET to get here, because the closest planet that could even be a stretch is so far away. To be able to travel here, take the 10,000 years it would take to get here at 10% of light speed, if you could do that, it's not thinkable. Yeah.
Well, I wasn't here last week, but did you talk about all the people that think they've actually seen aliens?
We did not.
Okay.
We did not. But I will say, in short, those are all highly discounted.
Are they?
Yeah, because there's no physical evidence. Now, you could have your experience. We can all have all kinds of experiences. The question always, especially when it comes to science, is it verifiable? Can you show me something that verifies that you have an alien? Of course, everyone, there's all the conspiracy theories that the government is hiding. They've got aliens tucked away at Roswell in a cooler somewhere, and they've actually performed autopsies on them. But we know all the pictures we see from those are all manufactured, and they're not real. They're not real. There is no substantive evidence that aliens have ever come here. And how do you explain these people's experiences? Well, there's a couple. Psychedelics, wishful thinking, and so that's a topic that I think we can pursue, maybe at another time, because really one of the things we think about too is when we have these experiences, when we have religious experiences, how does that size up with an alien visitation or an alien abduction or something like that? How does that size up, and why do we think a religious experience that we have is something better or different than that? So, but we won't, that's another road to travel. So today I want to I think there's some interesting tangents to all this that I think inform us, give us some interesting things to think about in terms of, one, how do we think about God and our relationship with Him, but also how do we talk about people in our own culture. So I want to think just briefly here, just in terms of eschatology. Eschatology is the study of last things, is what eschatology is. And I think when we think about all the representation of aliens in our culture, and we think about how that says something about our human nature, I think one of the things it tells me is that a lot of people are hoping for a Savior. When you stop and think about it, what is the fascination with all this? Because our culture recognizes a couple things. We're in bad straits. Humanity is in bad straits. Look at the world around us. What do we have? We have all kind of wars going on. It just seems endless. We have all kinds of conflicts. We have these concerns about climate change. Remember the one comic that I showed you last time? The aliens were really concerned that we were destroying our planet. So we have issues with climate change and pollution and limiting resources and disease. Oh my goodness, we've got a pandemic going on. So we have all of these problems that are swirling around us, and what we recognize is we're lacking as humans to successfully deal with all of these problems. They are just ongoing problems that we never seem to have a good solution to. So we need help. Where can we get some help from? Well, how about an alien? Someone who, remember we talked about last time, that what are we thinking about aliens? We're thinking that they're not just like us, they're better than us. They're smarter than us. They have better technology than us. And so if they could come here, well, they would have answers to our problem. And so in our search for a Savior, what kind of Savior are we looking for? Why would we look to extraterrestrials? What are we hoping for in a Savior? Well, so we want somebody to come and fix our problems. What don't we want? We want all the benevolence without accountability. Okay? We want somebody to come and fix all my problems, and yet I still want to be able to do all the things that I'm doing that are sinful and wrong. That's what we're looking for. So we don't want God to come save us, because then we're accountable to God. So we don't want that kind of Savior. But we want someone to come fix our problems. Yeah.
Well, I think, a lot of these, in almost any fantastic story where there's something that's unbelievable, if it's allegory and it leads us in the same direction of what our faith is telling us, it might be more easy for me to believe. Fantastic stories can still lead me to the answer that I want. It's not always everything that I need. I might believe that Mr. Tumnus can lead me to a being that is good but not safe.
Right. Okay.
That story is there.
Yep.
And I like where those kind of stories lead me, but they have to fit a little bit inside of my current belief system, which is kind of founded on life.
Right. Well, and so you bring a good point. When we think about fantastic stories in terms of a Savior, don't we believe in a fantastic story? Yes, we do. So we're open to that. But we want our cake and eat it too. And so do we want truth or do we want the whole truth? Sometimes I think we want bits and pieces of the truth. Yeah.
This goes back to C.S. Lewis that talks about that we have a God-sized hole. All humanity is a God-sized hole.
As Pascal.
And the reality is, I can't believe in a God, right? Is what it doesn't make sense. But they still have that longing for otherness, or that there is something greater than us.
Mhm.
For the very reasons that you're talking about.
Yeah.
To me, it just screams of that. I can't accept this because of all the reasons we just talked about, but I still have this longing.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm going to look for.
Yeah. And so what I want to suggest is that that's something we can tap into. When we think about evangelism and discipleship, how do we move people closer to the gospel? Now, of course, it's not us. We always trust in the Spirit to be doing that work. But one of the things we can do is just find common ground with people, and understand, okay, so if someone's really excited about aliens, chase that a little bit. Tell me why you're so fascinated with that, why that's of interest to you, and that could bring up some really good and interesting conversations that could open some doors for talking about, here's a really fantastic story that actually we have good reason to think it's true. So, but here's the thing though, another kind of interesting thing is in terms of eschatology, and I don't want to chase this too far, but it's just something to think about. We're always concerned about the Antichrist, right? When is the Antichrist going to come and who's the Antichrist going to be? Well, I'll just suggest to you that aliens is a pretty good candidate for that. Okay, because we do have this kind of built-in gullibility right now for aliens. We're really open to that idea. And so, everyone keeps saying, follow the science, but the general public does not do that. Do you understand that? They're following political rhetoric. They're not following science. If some politicians on the TV about COVID or whatever it is, they keep echoing this, follow the science, follow the science. So is that what people do? They get on the internet and look up research studies and see what the studies show? And no, they don't do that. Not at all. They're not following science. They're just following whatever their favorite politician is telling them. And I think the same thing is true with aliens. We're so steeped in media culture that tells us that there are aliens, and yet what do we talk about? Even though there's an openness to the possibility that life could be out there, science tells us what? ET is not going to be here. ET is not going to come here. But people won't follow that. People won't really follow the science. And so what do we have on our doorstep right now in terms of our technology? So think about all the stuff we're doing with technology that really is set up right now to fool people. So Android technology. Have you guys seen some of the interesting stuff that's coming out of the Japanese labs? They are working really hard at making robots that look exactly like humans. Now, they still have a lot of ticks. You would not fool me that they're humans. But more and more, they're getting closer and closer and closer to something that looks really human. Yeah.
I just saw a news article about an android that was made an actual citizen of something like Saudi Arabia or something.
They made it a citizen? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And so, but then we also have all this artificial intelligence that is really astonishing, and it really tricks people. It gives you the feeling that you're actually interacting with a person. But you know what you're really interacting with? You're interacting with a very complex program and database is what you're working with. And it works so fast, it can take your question very quickly, go search a database, and come back with a response. So it's highly programmed, but it tricks us. It gives us the impression that you're actually talking and interacting with a real person. How many of you have ever had a conversation with Siri on your phone?
In what language?
Yeah, right? And are you guys familiar with deepfakes? So there is digital technology right now where they can take video of a person, President Biden, and they can get him, they can absolutely model his speech pattern and his visual imagery, and you can get him to say anything you want to. Anything. And you and I have no ability to detect the difference. Now, if you have a digital forensics expert who can go in and actually look at the video footage underneath it, they can look at the coding and stuff and they can tell that this is a deep fake. But you and I can't. So point is, with our huge willingness to be accepting of aliens, could this be something Satan could really take advantage of and get people to construct an alien visitor who would come and tell us all that we need to do to fix our planet? That's out there. That's a possibility. So I don't want to dwell on that or stir up fear or anything like that. But the point is, there's enough technology out there to steer people away from truth and instead, it's what's the Bible tell us. People are exchanging truth for a lie. But our lies are becoming more and more complicated and harder to discern the truth. That's scary. So another kind of spin-off to think about aliens, are you guys familiar with Seti? So Seti is it's a program, it's a privately funded program, so that's a good thing. It's not government funded, although there's probably some government funding embedded in there somewhere. So this is a program, SETI stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. That's what we're looking for. We're not just looking for life, we're looking for intelligence. So the SETI Foundation began in 1984, so that's 37 years ago. And what they've been doing is they've been making observations using radio telescopes. In effect, they're listening to the universe. Because we get all kinds of noise from the universe, but it's just random noise. But the thought is, if there is intelligent life out there, at least as intelligent as us, we're sending out radio signals all the time, right? You turn on your radio, we are broadcasting radio signals all the time. And where are those going? Does it just go to you in your house sitting there? No, it's electromagnetic radiation, and it's going out into space.
Doesn't the sun emit that just by itself?
Oh, sure. Yeah, there's radio waves coming. Radio waves are part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So the sun's producing all kinds of... So all stars out in the universe are sending us radio waves, which we can listen to. And we actually can learn some things about stars that you can't learn from the visible spectrum, the colors of the rainbow. There's other kinds of information that we can get from X-ray spectrum and from gamma ray spectrum and from radio spectrum. But what we get in terms of radio waves is just regular, consistent patterns. But what if aliens are out there and they're broadcasting radio as well? So we're listening. And so for the last 37 years, we've been listening to the universe, waiting to see if we can hear something out there that's off pattern, that would tell us that there's some intelligence. So, after 37 years, what have we found? Nothing. There was one transmission one time that got them really excited. And they thought they finally found something. They got some kind of message. And then later on they figured out, oh, no, never mind. It wasn't anything. So they have found nothing. Of course, then the interesting question is, what if you did hear something? What if we did get some kind of transmission that cued us into the idea that, wow, there's life out there? What would you do about it? Could you send a message back? How long would it take to get there? I mean, if it's coming from Kepler 142b, well, it would take 1,400 years for our message to get there. And the person who sent that message is dead. They sent it 1,400 years ago. So the whole possibility of having some kind of communication isn't. And even Stephen Hawking was, his take on it was, don't do that. Don't send messages out there. Because if aliens come to visit us, it's not because they're friendly. They're going to come here because they want to get something from here. And we would only be standing in their way. And so in all likelihood, if an alien did come here, they would wipe us out. So don't invite them. That was Hawking's take on it.
That's kind of like giving credence to sin without giving credence to God.
Well, yeah, right, yeah. So, anyway, so that's just an interesting side note. But there's kind of a positive spin on this whole process. Because, and this is something we realize in a lot of fields of science and what we're doing in science. And that, as silly as all this effort seems to me, what it does show us is that we believe we have the ability to detect intelligent agency. There's a way to do that. That we can look out at the world and know that this just wasn't random, that this came, what we're seeing, the pattern that we're seeing in nature didn't emerge from natural laws, it came from an intelligent agent. I think that's important, that's valuable to us. And so Christian thinkers, Bill Dembski is the one who kind of formulated some of these ideas, is that they've developed what's called an intelligent design filter. What do we do to help us detect whether an intelligent agent is functioning or not? And so this is the kind of the flow chart for that. But if you take a look at any kind of phenomenon that happens, so the first thing to look at is this phenomenon something that could just be explained by natural law? Well, if the answer is yes, then we explain that by what we call necessity. It had to happen that way. It couldn't have happened any other way. And we're okay with that. Not most things can be explained by that. But if we continue to look at that phenomenon and we recognize that there is a certain level of complexity to it, how do we explain complexity? Now, complexity is a really tough thing to discern. For instance, the leaves are all falling on the ground and you have a pile of leaves in your backyard. Is that complex? Yes, it's complex. Because what would it take to reconstruct that very same pile? What would you have to do? So there actually is a level of complexity just in a pile of leaves. So we have to look at, does the complexity we look at, could it just come about by chance? A pile of leaves? Well, yes. So how do we tell the difference in terms of complexity? And so the next layer of thinking is what's called specification. Is there a pattern in that complexity that is independently recognizable of that thing? So for instance, you've all driven through the mountains, driven through a mountain pass or something, and you look at this rock on the wall, and you say, oh, that looks like a face of a person. Right? We've all had that experience. Where did that face come from? Well, it just came by nature, right? It was just, we're not surprised. But our eyes want to interpret everything we see. We want to make sense of everything. What's the most familiar thing to humans? Faces. So we see faces everywhere. We're looking, your brain is looking for faces in everything. And we'll see faces on the Cheerio box, in your bowl of cereal. You'll see, oh, there's a face. Okay? But what about something like Mount Rushmore? There's a face. Am I just imagining that? Do I think something like Mount Rushmore could have just come about by natural laws, natural processes? Well, why don't we think so? Well, there's more to that face than just random rocks. It's an abstract thing that we're just kind of pulling a face out of. So this is what we think about in terms of specification. That there's information there that is independent. Because I've seen a picture of Abraham Lincoln, and I see that same image on the rock, right? And there's a corresponding information that's independent of the rock, and I can make sense out of that. So do we have this kind of specification? So in terms of Seti, for instance, what are they looking for? Well, they're looking for like number patterns. For instance, a sequence of prime numbers that's encoded in that. Well, you wouldn't just expect a sequence of prime numbers to show up randomly. So do we have some kind of specification? And this has all kinds of implications in terms of intelligent design. Yeah.
In Seti, because there's a lot of noise out there, so they have to filter through their noise. And
Yep.
if we went back to the face and the rock thing, Michelangelo says every rock has an angel in it. You just have to get rid of all the parts that
Yep.
aren't the angel.
Right.
So if you just filter away all the other radio noise, you could get to the base of angels.
Maybe, if it's there. If it's really there. And that's what their hope is, right? And so, but the whole point here is, there's this whole idea of detectability of intelligent agency, that we can look at things and know for certain that there was intelligent work going on. I wrote an article a little while ago about a find that they had made in a cave in France. It was a conch shell, and it had been found back in the 1950s. It was determined that it was some kind of drinking cup or something, and they just put it on the shelf in the museum. And very recently, they were going through that and just kind of surveying their collection, and someone picked up that conch shell and said, "That's interesting. There's some marks on here." And said, "Let's maybe take a little closer look at it." And they were actually able to use some more modern technology, like scanning electron microscope and that kind of thing, and they were actually able to get in really tight, close look at all these marks that were on the end of this conch shell. And what they determined was that these marks were actually human-made. But they were kind of marks, they were like drill marks on the end of the conch shell that you would not have expected from just random washing around on the beach or something. And what they finally determined was this was a musical instrument, and that there had been a hole drilled at the end of this conch shell so that it could be used for a musical instrument. So the point is, we have means in a lot of our fields of science to look at things in nature, we find in nature, and be able to point to something and say, this didn't come about just by chance. There was human agency here. And that's something we look at a lot in terms of intelligent design. Now, here's another kind of tangent to this. You know, atheists always have an answer in their pocket about anything. And so we want to think about what do we say to an atheist about aliens? Because we've got this question about extraterrestrial life. Is there life out in the universe or not? Now, from our Christian standpoint, we say, yeah, maybe. Be interesting if there was and if there wasn't. But, so the big question is, out in the universe, is life common or is it rare? Now, from the Christian standpoint, we kind of tend to want to say that it's rare. That human life on Earth is kind of rare. It's a unique thing. So what does an atheist say about that observation? Well, here's one thing I've heard. Their take on it is this. This isn't evidence that there's no God. There's a Christological argument here. That if there was a God, why would he waste all the space out there in the universe and only have life on this one planet? So there must not be a God. Because if there was a God, there would be life on a lot of planets. How do you respond to something like that?
Doesn't God need to put barriers between these life forms that he's given? Not to get into whether there's free will on all of these and everything, but if he's going to put humans on here and leave us to our own devices, and it doesn't always turn out that well to just have us humans here, and he knows that it's not going to turn out that well, he knows that we're going to be bad actors to a certain extent, wouldn't he want these barriers between other life forms in his universe? If I have 2 colonies of ants in a lab, the barrier is that glass. I can't trust these ants, that they're different species of ants, to get along without just killing them.
Right.
So I want to keep them apart. I want to keep them separated, and God does this by saying, well, 1,400 light years is a pretty good glass between us.
Yeah. Well, right. Okay, so this brings up this really interesting thing in terms of how do we approach our conversations with unbelievers. And one of our approaches, and the one we tend to the most, is we want to come up with answers. We want to answer in a positive. We want to come up with an answer. In other words, we're operating on the defensive. You want to take a defense? I've got an answer for you. Okay? Well, do you know that's true? What you just said?
Sometimes I feel like I'm up against his painted glass.
Well, so you don't, is the point. You don't. Okay? So now you have 2 people and you're both arguing out of ignorance. Okay? I do that really well. So here's the thing. There's a better approach to take here. Okay? If someone says something like this, and this is a common, Christological arguments are very common that come from atheists, to say, well, God wouldn't have done it that way. How do you know? That's a real important question. And this turns it on the offensive. It asks that person to explain their reasoning. How do you know? Because if you're telling me that God wouldn't have done that, well, gee, you're omniscient, aren't you? You know everything. You know the absolute mind of God and what he would do and what he would not do. Maybe, just maybe, there is a really good reason that God made only one planet in the entire universe that had life on it. I don't know what that is, but it's possible that there is a good reason. You don't know it, and neither do I. But please don't sit there telling me that God would not have done that, because you don't know. So real important that you can be diplomatic about that. Use good Irish diplomacy. You know what Irish diplomacy is? It's when you tell somebody to go to hell and they say thank you very much. You know, that they're okay with that. Okay? So that's one take. But one thought here is, okay, so even atheists will recognize, okay, life is rare out on the planet. It's hard to come by. So how do we explain life on this planet? Well, they don't want to go there. But so a good explanation is what's called panspermia. Ever heard of panspermia? Okay, panspermia is this idea that life on this planet came from aliens. See, we're back to our aliens here. Now that's a real idea. One of the guys who was a strong promoter of this was Francis Crick. He was one of the guys who discovered DNA. So a really smart guy, and he gets it. Getting life by chance on this planet is not going to be easy. So a better explanation, especially in the time frame that we have available to us on Earth, is that some alien came and seeded the planet. Neat! Answers all the questions, right? Well, so one, what's your evidence? That's always a good question. What's your evidence? But guess what? It does not answer all the questions. Because the question is, where did life come from? Where did this alien come from? You haven't explained that. All you've done is you've pushed the question further back, and you have avoided answering the question. So that's not an answer. It's not an answer. Yeah?
I think you can turn the first question around at that point too. Why would they waste all of this space? Why wouldn't they have life on every planet? Why wouldn't they do exactly what they're denying God with? But they want to say that like all these aliens do.
Good point. Yeah. Why did they only pick this planet? I mean, we know there's not a lot of life out there. Okay. Now, what a lot of atheists will want to say is that we have really a really big universe, and that in fact life is really common out in the universe, and we just haven't found it yet. But it's really common, right? So do we have a problem with that idea? Well, I mean, what's the evidence? That's obviously a good first question. We certainly haven't demonstrated that yet. But let's just say there is. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, life really is common in the universe. It's widespread. And so the atheist is saying, see, life, it's just easy to come by. Life just happens in this universe because it's really common in the universe. And so for sake of argument, let's say that's true. Oh yes, life is common in the universe. Does that tell us that there isn't a God out there? No, it doesn't. Why? Well, good, right. So God could have created it too, but we have to kind of press the issue. Okay, cool. Life's easy to come by. Tell me how it happened here. Go for it. I'm game. Tell me. So let
seems to me there's a lot of disparate ideas that have just enough inertia to get traction to become an ism, a belief, something that somebody's going to latch on to. And if we're looking, for a singular defense against these atheist arguments here, you've just presented 3 different hills for them to run up. And you can't argue the rationale behind your faith when the people you're arguing against are going to run up 3 different hills or more. How many more ideas are out there that have enough believers to become a belief system?
Right. Yeah.
I think another thing, the more we understand stuff, and the more we have mechanical equipment can go to places where you can't go physically. Like we can't dive down very deep.
Yeah.
You can put a submarine, but the submarine can't go down very deep. But they can put a remote vehicle down there and take a look at a shoe in the bottom of the ocean when the Titanic sank. And you see corrosion and rust all over it. But the shoe doesn't have anything growing on it. Other things have stuff growing on it. The shoe doesn't. And why is that? Because it's tanned.
Mm-hmm.
There's that kind of thing. The more we discover in places that are inhospitable to ourselves, there's inhospitable is what any other planet would be. So
Yeah.
why do we have to say the planet has to be like ours? Because we have places here where we can't exist.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So, but in terms of this saying life is easy to come by, well, then a place to go is to say, okay, show me how it's easy. Show me how it's easy. And so we think about the origin of life, and researchers point back to it's the primordial soup. It's where life began. So 3.5 billion years ago, we had all these chemicals floating around in the water, and so there's this naturalistic narrative that we find throughout the sciences, biology, of course, in particular. But the whole idea that life can emerge from inorganic chemicals. But so you've got chemists who want to say that we have inherent in universal systems this progression that can happen. It can happen. Where we have inorganic molecules that will just be able to assemble themselves into more complex organic molecules. And then all of those organic molecules will just have the ability to assemble themselves into cells. And then those cells are going to have to be able to assemble themselves into a complex organism. Like, just a bacteria. Not a bacteria, but something like a worm, okay? Just a worm. Give me a worm. That's a pretty tall order. And the question is that we put back on them is, do we have any evidence for that? Now, short answer for your benefit, no. There isn't any. And people have been looking. And there's a deep dive here, and we're just not going to have time for it. But there's a lot of researchers who have looked at trying to explain the origin of life. But like one of the very first things you have to explain is, where do we get the basic building blocks? Things like sugars and amino acids and fatty acids. Where do we get these from? Can't do it. We won't go into details. But for decades, people have poured a lot of money and effort into research trying to come up with ways to show that we could just get things like amino acids. And they fail. But then you have to go the next step. How do you get from amino acids to a protein? How do you get from a protein to a cell? How do you get from a cell to a complex organism? And there's no answer out there. Okay? Now, Here's the atheistic answer to all of that. Well, we just don't know yet. Good answer? What's the problem with that?
Well, how long, a lot of these questions, God asked Job some of these questions, and that's the first book in the Bible. You don't know where light comes, you don't know where light's made of, you don't know why I made kangaroos.
Yep.
He asked a lot of tough questions of Job, so for a few thousand years, those questions have been there, and obviously, somebody's trying to answer some of those questions, and they still don't have the answers yet, so.
Right.
If
Right.
if there yet is way down on the time frame.
Right.
How come our yet can't?
Well, and so realize what's happening here. This is what would be referred to as a God of the gaps argument without a God. But that's fundamentally what it is. Okay, and we have to be careful of that on our side as well, and that's another conversation. But how do we say, here's something we don't know about, we don't have an explanation for, so we think, well, God did it. Well, that's kind of weak thinking to some degree. We need to discern, how do we tell the difference between an actual argument and just a God of the gaps kind of argument, where we're just kind of putting God in the place of our lack of knowledge or understanding. Well, the atheist is doing the exact same thing when they say, we don't know yet. But someday, give science a long enough time, enough money, enough grant money, and we'll figure it out. Well, all they've done there is set up a God of the gap. But their God is what? It's science. It's scientism. It says science will have all the answers for us when they actually have no argument. So this certainly is a way to contest and challenge anyone who comes back with that. Yeah, we don't know yet. We just don't know. And they feel like that's a good, honest position for them to take. But if you don't know, then guess what? You don't know. And are you open to other possibilities, other explanations, besides anything that science could have to offer you? That's a fair question. Okay? All right, well, here we are. It's 10 o'clock. I had, as usual, I have a cajillion things on here, and we're just not going to do them. I mean,
So like you're saying, devil's in the detail.
well, right. So first of all, is any quick questions just on what we've talked about today? Yeah.
Last 5 slides.
Sorry, skipping them.
So you could do another 8-week class on the last.
Well, see, that's right. Well, that's probably true. That's probably true. Well, so this kind of this is our last class for this semester. So the no hour is taking a break for the Advent period, and so but there will be the no hour will start back up again mid-January, and so there'll be like a 12-week block of time for a next set of classes. So the question, I guess, is, just getting feedback from you. What kinds of things might you be interested in? And I don't know, maybe they'll just put out a general survey to see what people are interested in. And one possibility here, and James asked me if I would be willing to teach another class next spring. I said, sure, I could do that, but I'm willing to teach anything. So, if we kind of continued on, there's a lot we could talk about. There's a lot of topics. I don't think we could cover all of these, but, and we've kind of like lightly touched on a few of these things, but we could do a little deeper dive on some of these things. So I mentioned, first of all, God of the gaps reasoning, and how do miracles fit into that? Are miracles consistent with science and Christian thinking? Where does that fit in? Neuroscience has a huge amount that it's trying to tell us about things like consciousness and free will and religious experience. And what do we say about all that? Have they figured it out? Are you just your brain? Is that all you are? Are you just your brain? Or is there reason to think there's something more than that? Human origins. This has caught a lot of attention lately. There's been a lot of books published in the last few years. William Lane Craig just published a new book. I haven't even gotten it yet. Thinking about who was the historical Adam. And he does think that there is such a thing as a historical Adam. But how does that line up with some of the things that we're seeing in the fossil record and in genetics and things like that? What does all this tell us? Origin of life. The slides that I had on here just kind of took a quick glimpse under that rug. What do we say about origin of life? And then certainly intelligent design and fine-tuning of the universe. What are some of the things that we see out in the universe that tell us that there is intelligent agency that has been in action in our universe, that everything in the universe cannot be explained by natural law. So it's more than just chance and necessity, but design is act. But how do we know? What's some actual evidence that we could put forth? So there, a huge bunch of topics there. So I don't know if you want to chase those dogs, or I also suggested to James just to do something more just general apologetics, and there's a lot of good resources out there. So I suggested to James, I'd be willing to do a thing on Mere Christianity. That's a great book, if you've never read that. Mama Bear Apologetics is a really interesting book. It's really designed for parents, to help parents help their kids address some of the lies that are out in our culture about pluralism and relativism, things like these kind of messages that are out in our culture. And how do we recognize them, and how do you help your kids respond to those, whether that's kids or grandkids? I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Norm Geisler and Frank Turek. Geisler just passed away recently, but Frank Turek is a really good guy. That covers a lot of grounds, just kind of knocking out a lot of, it comes into with some science kind of stuff, but not only. And then this other one, Confronting Christianity by Rebecca McLaughlin's really good. She takes a look at 12 questions that people commonly ask about Christianity, and what do you have to say about this? It's very issues-oriented, so things like, okay, does the Bible support slavery? Or what does the Bible have to say about homosexuality? Very, very contemporary issue kind of thing. So, any one of those would be great. So I don't know, talk to me. What kinds of things are you interested in? Because ultimately we want to scratch where you itch. So if you can give me some feedback that I can send back to the elders and help construct the no hour for next semester. So, yeah.
Trying to think how to phrase this. And maybe it's how to discern truth in critical, and even sort of around critical thinking skills. There's so much information getting thrown from all different directions, and when I look at polls and see that believers are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories than believe in these things, it says, how do we have a reason of faith? And when we body or Christians are focusing on that the name of Christ, are chasing after these things, and our witness is just blown up. So how do we discern that? How do we do you understand?
Yep. I think that's a real important question. How do we know what truth is? How do we know what we believe is true? And that's why this the Mama Bear Apologetics is kind of, I think, is a good resource on that, because it